Well, I thought I'd do something to mix it up, as if I don't cover enough bases as it is. But one of the things, if y'all been with me for a while, you may know, is saltwater fish. This is one of the big kingpins of saltwater fish. It's something that you probably expect to get when you go into any fish shop that you would see. And they're poisonous, by the way, which is also one of the big draws off of them. This is a picture taken from Gili Banta Island. It's a place near Komodo Island in Indonesia. A lot of people know about Komodo dragons and so on. In this picture appears to be some type of algae over the far right that I can't recognize, and then the red thing that's below him there is a porifera sponge, and it doesn't grow photosynthetically or off the light. It's really growing off of breathing, and if you had a time-lapse photography onto it, you'd see it breathing in and out, kind of. But if you have too much light on it, it'll start to grow algae on it and stuff. So it needs to be in a high current area, but low light. And there are symbiotic crabs and shrimp that live around on them, that go around and clean up the waste that goes in and out off of them and stuff, and keep the thing fresh but not chewed up. And it continually grows and grows and grows. It's a type of sponge. In the bottom left-hand corner there, it looks like a black thicket of thorns or who knows what, but that's actually a crinoid feather starfish. Yeah, it's odd, but it's a starfish with multiple arms, and the arms are pretty much like a pine tree, if you think of it that way, and each arm has a lot of little tassels over it, and they filter feed out of the water, but they, other than that, conspicuously look like a coral or something. They're kind of sticky if you ever touch them, and they filter feed planktonic foods and stuff out of the water. What's real cool is to watch one filter feed, because they start grabbing and they spray out like you could stretch your hand out and your fingers, and then they start dipping all their fingers into the middle as they're catching foods whenever they taste it. It's hard to keep one long term in captivity, but we've had a lot of advances in the last 15-20 years, especially on foods and stuff that they naturally eat. So it works that way, and corals eat a lot of that and so on. But you can also pollute your water trying to keep the thing alive, so you have to make sure you keep things correct. But I should do a separate video about it. It's even neater than their feeding type behaviors whenever they actually get up and start flying, and it looks like some kind of alien spider creature. It's just wicked. But I guess the keynote that we're talking about here is this volatile lionfish. It's known in the hobby, and whenever you order them in, whenever you get them in for tropical stores, it'll be a red volatile lionfish. And so what's the deal? Because some of them are black. In fact, if you look at this one, it's darkest maroon. But if you look on the tips, you can still see some redishness, but there's even some dark maroon to black on it. Well, you get a lot of variation in them, and as they mature, they can change. I've seen it happen rapidly. I've seen one getting attacked by another fish and change from a red to a black in the process of a day or two. But out in the wild, they can change and so on, and this behaviorism that they have goes along with it as they mature. So you can get one that's real small and then grow them up, and as they grow up, they're going to change somewhat too. And there's a variation on a theme that you'll have with that. But there's also a variation on a theme of this lionfish. In fact, the red lionfish, like I'm saying, is quite often red or black striped, like a zebra, or like this is red, and then they'll be almost just a candy color, candy striped red. And they can keep that to full maturity. But the black volatile, or the black lionfish, which is Pterosis miles, and I'll show you a picture of coming up, is actually a variation on a theme of it, but you'll see them more often red than black, and they'll keep it into maturity. And on their bands, quite often they'll have a thicker band and so on. Whoops. So looking at this guy here, you can easily make out his eye, but one thing I always thought was neat, that even though they have this stripe pattern that runs back on their body all the way through, like on a zebra, so zebra lionfish is also one of its names, but that's been taken by one certain type that's not so free swimming. So this is like a scorpion fish. In fact, if you look around the lips, you can see all these tassels that are hanging off. In fact, some of the tassels are with the stripes, and the stripe continues. So it's a type of conspicuous concealing behavior that shouldn't be all bumblebee, colored up like this. It really should be something that's real muted colors and looks like the rock around him or so on, so he can be a stealth fighter. But this guy is not necessarily a stealth fighter at all. He goes out. One of his other names is butterfly cod because of his wings. His Latin name again is Pterois. So that comes Latin, hey, that comes in play in both fields suddenly. And that has to do with winged, and it's where we get pterodactyls from and so on. And so you can see this turkey wing that he's got that's going on display on his side here. And that's another of his names, is turkey fish. So if you're ordering them in from different people in the Philippines and Bali and these places around, you get to know what the names are. But they always have the Latin names after them, of course. And so you get to know it. But due to variations on a theme that are existent on it, there used to be one named Brussels lionfish, or Pterois russellii, instead of volatins, or miles. And it's kind of been absorbed in. You don't see that name anymore, but it really is different than the other ones that are from the locale that's not too far away. And it's all in the striping, and people used to have arguments about this and so on, and this is 30 years ago now or more. But you see how this one's fins, as far as the ones that are around the back and tail fins here, like the anal fin at the bottom, or the back from the pud knuckle is pretty much clear, right? And so is this that's clear. There are other ones that you still see that striping in, and it's real evident, although you kind of see it on this guy, but it's really just in the spines of it, and it's clear in between. This looks a lot like one that I had that lived 16 years, and he wasn't zero when I bought him, figuring he must have lived 17, 18, under 20. People have said they've had him live well over 20 years. It's a lot of fish that can live quite a long time. There are other ones that somehow just live a different life altogether, just like some of the creatures on land, and they have a fleeting existence, all the way from things like butterflies and flies and mayflies and stuff that last only a short amount of time, to things that last an incredibly long amount of time, composed to what you would probably think of a fish. So I've always thought that they were real cool, and then of course you find out that they're poisonous and stuff, and that's gotta. So what's poisonous about them is the top spines that they have on their body. They're like most scorpion fish, like if you stepped on a stonefish or so on, they all have these little spines on top. And those spines are basically like a syringe, and they're attached to a gland that's at the base of each one of those spines on the top of their body. And if you push down on it, it scoots out just a little bit of venom. And their venom is pretty much like 6 times as strong, or a normal shot of one of those, is like 6 times stronger than a yellow jacket, which is pretty potent compared even to bees. And so it can actually be a problem for people. In fact, it can stop your heart and things, and you'd have to have an A pin. When I used to sell these to people, and believe me, in the fish stores and everything I've had 10,000 of these come through and go over the years. They're a real cool fish. They smarter than your average bear. You'll get his eye gaze and he'll recognize you. You can tell that over time, especially most of your fish can tell when you go through the gesture of going to feed them, whatever that is, right before they get fed. They're real smart about it too. They know who feeds them. In fact, if you're going to get a cup and then go make food up and then do stuff, he will notice that cup right off the bat and come over there and sit right at the corner of that aquarium. They're gluttons. You don't want to hand feed them because you don't want to take the chance of getting popped by it. The question probably arises to you, if I've ever been hit by one, then yeah, the answer is yeah, 3 times I've been hit by lionfish. And the first time I thought that was pretty bad. That must be what it is. And so it's really not that bad. It's about like a bee sting, and it has a throbbing effect and searing kind of pins and needles, and my finger all swole up and stuff, and down into my hand some, and I only got it in one finger and one poke, and not too good apparently. Because the second time I got hit, it got me pretty damn good, and I realized, whoa. Of course, they talked about the more you get hit by these things, the more you could be susceptible to it. And even if you were susceptible to it, if you got hit by one and had an A pin, for anaphylactic shock type syndrome, and were able to do yourself with that it would still be worse probably the next time you got it, and the next time, just very similar to what bee attacks would be like. And the third time was just as bad, if not worse, but by then I actually had learned quite a few things from other people who had it happen. And of course you hear some of these things, so they talked about putting acidic water on it, which of course isn't going to do anything for you really. And that's the idea of shutting off jellyfish, and you can pee on a jellyfish things and all that, and it turns it off because it's acidic. It's so ammonia and acidic, it just freaks the creature out entirely. No more firing. Of course, by the time you get that, it's usually fired off pretty damn good. I've been hit by a jellyfish just a little bit one time, and I know a guy right in front of me that got hit pretty bad, and then watching him over an hour and a half and then see the sear mark show up on him was pretty drastic. Yeah, looked like he had just been whipped by a ghost or some shit that had some special kind of whip. I don't know. One of the stories that goes along with this from the islanders is that it's a demon fish, and that there's a story of brothers. So this goes along with kind of some of the things we ought to talk about here, but and these brothers, and one of the brothers had caught one of the fish, and there was an argument over the fish, and one threw it at the other one, and it killed the other guy. And in the story, it seems like that must have been something that happened or whatever. I asked one of the Bali guys about it and everything, and he said that's a story from these other islands, and he's not too familiar with it, but it's probably just stuff that they tell their kids to warn them about what are poisonous fish, just like you would snakes and something like that, and goes on. But you'd think that it might have something to do with the reality of something that had happened at one time too, especially because of it being venomated and what could happen. So you never know. It's one of those folklore things that off in the wind. People wonder about the side fins on these things. In fact, what's neat about this one, and what was neat about the one that I had, was that it had clear parts of its outside side fins more than just the tail that was on it. and the bottom fin's a little bit. And if you look on the bottom fins draping down below it, there are windows through there, you can see the blue through, but on the side you can see here where you can see right through to the zebra striping on the body, which is real cool. And you get to look at it up close, you realize that there's a whole skin membrane and everything, but it's as transparent as glass. But if glass had any thickness, then it would screw up your vision going through it, and that looks pretty good. It's paper thin. It's just neat as hell to see something like that, but it's something that you'll rarely see. I used to get them in, like I say, thousands. And I've seen it quite a bit from one distributor, but not super often, and from others very rarely. Over a time of doing this in the hobby, I found out where to order who, what from, and what you were trying to get, and so on like that. But this is a poisonous fish, so it's a little bit different. It has to be sent with a venomous tag onto it. I used to ask people whenever they'd go, ooh, I want to get a lionfish. First of all, you have to have something big enough for him to grow up in. And volatiles will actually get over a foot. In fact, the record's like 18 inches, and that doesn't happen too often in captivity. You have to have somebody overfeeding the guy and big old damn aquarium and all the right kind of things to get somebody to grow up into a giant Viking looking kind of thing. I've had a lot of them, just like normal people. You're going to get 6 foot or a little bit below. They're not going to end up being 6'9". There's very few that gets to be shack or anything like that. So it just makes a simple concept. This one's probably about 10 inches long. You always measure a fish to the pud knuckle, which is the end of the tail where you would think that the tail starts from, because that's the end of the flesh of the fish, i.e. I could chop off that tail, everything's just fine, because fish could have a real long tail or a real short tail or whatever, and that don't really count if they've got a super long tail. All of a sudden, I caught a fish this long and so on, because there ain't no meat to that situation. One of the arguments is how many between the anal fin here at the bottom and the back was how many stripes there are. If you look at the front of it kind of closely, you can tell that they've got these stripes that are in there, especially on the cowling right here, that are a thick stripe, and then a very thin one, and then a medium, and then a very thin one, and then a thick stripe, and then a thin one, and a medium. And that idea carries all the way down the whole way. A lot of people say, well, this is supposed to be some type of camouflage or things, and it looks like what it does, just like there are birds that are real damn smart, and there are birds that are duh in comparison. Let's just say like a falcon or an eagle versus something like a wren or a sparrow. And when these things go to attack these little fish, what they do is they splay out their fins and they display it, and it almost looks like some zodiac mind warp you're fixing to walk into. And I've seen fish literally look at it like, wow, so where's the popcorn? What's going on here? Did I take anything funny? What's it? And all of a sudden they get eaten. They have this snap of their jaw where they pull in something, and he can pull in something from about here in front of his face, and it'll go off. But they come in and they shake their fins, and you'll see fish just start looking at it like it's a display. And of course the middle of this thing is the problem, but it doesn't look like that when it's coming head on at you. And they use those side fins to help wrangle fish around through the rocks and scoop them up out of an area and so on, and try to just get them to where they can line up. If you look at them real close while all this is going on too, they'll actually try to blow on the fish and put a jet of water out that'll turn the fish around to where it's head first. And the moment, even though it's happening fast perhaps, that the fish gets turned around head first, they go for the slurp. That way they catch him head first. In fact, that's the only way you can eat this guy correctly. And there are some fish that are, kind of immune, apparently, to eating him or getting pronged up in the mouth and so on, but it really helps if they eat it head first. Just folds all those spines down. You don't get any poking things, and ta-da. So let's go on and look at some variations of this as we go on here. This is another variation, and you can see where it gets the turkey idea. There are 18 venomous spines across the top of it, and in here you can see it's the spot-tailed lionfish, and he has little bitty spots all in his tail. That wasn't evident in that other one, but if you look at the stripes, it's that same thin, but one stripe, the thick one, is always well pronounced in this variation versus the others, right? Another thing to note about these is that above their eye, which kind of looks like a frog face coming at you, and this one is quite red, but his fins are all brown, like a turkey, if you will, is that on their eyes they have a stalk or an antenna that comes up, and sometimes it's leafed and sometimes it's not also. So that can be something very different in showing too. And while the side fins and things and even the tail is transparent on this one, the side fins don't have a transparency where you're really seeing through it like a direct window. It's at best opaque in its areas of zebraness. But he's strutting along, throwing it out there, and so whenever they do, they're not real fast. They can fold them back and go if they need to, but they swim along in that slow, casual manner to get all the fish kind of complacent to the idea, well, he's just a slow lumbering, and what's that video thing screen? Wow, and he just eats them. They'll eat shrimp and all kinds of little fish. In fact, what I used to tell people is they'll basically eat anything that'll fit in their mouth, and you'll be surprised what will fit in their mouth. Looking at this variation, you can tell that it's different, but they call this the antenna lionfish. Now, of course, I just talked about how all the other ones have antennas on their eyes, and this one does too, so what makes him different? Well, see, one thing that makes him different, if you notice around the head here, he doesn't have that striped pattern at all that we were looking at before, but at the tail it tries to mimic that pretty good, but the face area is all these crosshatch patterns that are cutting in and crossing in and different geometric patterns, very dark and so on. It doesn't have the extra zebra line, but like they're in an area they don't know what zebras look like, so they're not trying to mimic a zebra in any way or whatever, right? Well, in reality, this one is much smaller than the other kind, and if you'll notice, his side fins are splayed out and they have these long spines on them too. So we're going to look at a legal hybrid here in a little while, which kind of goes with genetics that we were doing videos about and everything. So, like I tell you, even when I get away and I start talking about things, I can't get away from concepts or at least something, or here, what? So this little guy, and there's little ones known as zebra lionfish. There's a Hawaiian version that has them and everything. So this is in a zoo exhibit, though, in Vienna, Austria. Although they can be from around the world. See, what was real neat to me was that you can take this little glass box, hook up a good filter to it, and know what the hell you're doing. Or have somebody working on it every once in a while, knowing what it is and keeping it in line. And the people will tell you how to feed them and give the right foods and everything for them. And you can actually keep a piece of the ocean, like you took Star Trek Enterprise and you beamed up this little section of the ocean and set it right in your tank, and boom. Well, it doesn't work that way. It's got to cycle and break in and so on, but eventually you're able to do this. But also, instead of making something that's like, well, this is all northern Hawaii, or this is all just from Philippines, or so on, you can get things from around the world, and as long as they are compatible with each other, you can put together a display of quite a few gemstones that are incredible and radically different shapes, different colors. And of course, this thing stands out. I don't care what kind of marble collection you got. This is Pterois lunulata, or lunate, or luna, or moon lionfish. They're known to come off the coast of Japan and run up around in a few islands in a set of what you would call Western Pacific, leading all the way to Midway and all these other islands type there. And they're somewhat rare, but there's also two forms that are radically different in that area. One has the little teardrop picture forms all on it and has the see-through parts on it. This one doesn't. This one has a webbing form that's on it. And what's very unique about it is, even though it has the zebra stripe thin, thick, thin, thick, thin, the thick part on it, every single scale is outlined, but then, so it's almost like porcelain, or like looking at the moon or something. And of course, at the time of finding things, things were named and so on. I've gotten a few of these in actually, and then come to find out you're not supposed to get any in, so you just play out it like, well, this one was kind of messed up. The other form is even more rare. They had the teardrop forms on them. I might eventually try to show you a picture of it if we get out of this. And they've been found all kinds of places. In fact, the weirdest place that I've seen that lanula form is New York Harbor, but that's believed to have been a transposition in some way that it happened. What's strange about that is that this fish is only from the Indo-Pacific. And in fact, when you get into Hawaii, they don't have this fish anymore. They've got their own version, like the version I showed right there, and they have one called Sphex. In the Indian Ocean, they have something that looks like that Antenata that we were just looking at, but it's all over its body like its face. And so you can almost see that if you took those two, the first one we were talking about, and this, and they somehow would be able to breed because they're closely related, that you might end up with something like that. Genetics can prove things like this. They just need to get into it. There are enough people into the idea to start checking these things out. One thing about lanula, this form, it doesn't really have any of those eye stalks at all. In fact, you'll occasionally get some of the other forms where instead of having the big tall ones like the first few that we looked at, will be about half that size and more of a thorn, if you will. This one almost no tassel, no nothing. Doesn't do that. Doesn't have as much tasseling around the face, no tasseling at the throat. Bottom fins don't look like that, closed up. It's different. So here's Miles lionfish. I don't know if you can tell the difference. We were just talking about antenna, and this is one that has a drastic antenna form on him. This is probably a little smaller than the first one we were looking at, and probably only about 6 inches long of body. A little more red than the first one we were looking at. Still has transparent forms on his wings that are going there that are all stretched out. But his antennae are way long and they curl back, and this thing looks like Loki in a little helmet. In fact, if I had this guy, that's what his name would be. It's like the one I had was called Spike, but I guess that's for all known reasons. You know, a lot of fish get named after people, and you'd think there must have been somebody named Miles that it got named after, but truth be known, in it, it's all about Latin things, if it can be, in any of these names. And Miles actually goes along with soldiers and an idea. Yeah. And so it makes you think of the Miletians a little different and where their name comes from. But also the mile, and where does that actually come from? Well, that comes from mil, which means 1,000, like in millimeter. But instead of using that scale, it's a sacred geometry that's been used up on the scale of men and plants and everything around you. It's incredible when you get into it. I've got videos about it, but a mile was 1,000 what? Well, it's 1,000 paces. And just like in military, it's left, right, that's 1. Left, right, left, right, left, right. And you count off paces, 1,000 of which is basically right at a mile. averages out pretty well. And this one is found, now of course you find all the other ones in the Indo-Pacific, but then when we get into the Indian Ocean and over towards the klitch that runs up that becomes the Red Sea, if you will, where it's this almost reverse Florida concept, if you will, of being a peninsula, for it dives in there and comes out. This form here is in the Red Sea, or the Egyptian Red Sea they talk about. It's in Shab el Erg Reef that you can dive on. Odd thing is, tell you a story, I guess now here, where are we at? 30, good. I went diving a whole lot, mainly in the Caribbean though, a few times in Hawaii. And I ran into this fish down in the Florida Keys. Now this was in the early 90s. And while I was working at that shop, dealing with customers, I told somebody about it. That I ran into a bunch of them. There's a group. In fact, there was a whole cave with a cluster of them around on it. And you know, you can't see, everything's all dingy like the background over here on this guy, but all of a sudden I snapped a picture, and what looked like feather dusters and just corals sitting around on this little dive thing this guy was about to go through was actually covered with them. There must have been 8, 10, 12 right there, but we'd already seen 3 or 4. And that customer called me a liar. And I told him, I know that, I know you don't think there's any lionfish in there. And of course there's stonefish and things are all related to them. There's lionfish. I mean, and it looked just like these with that stripe. And I had some right there in the shop, and we were talking about it right there, pointing at them. Somehow the conversation got to that. And he got all mad and it made me question it and everything. And I said, man, well, you make me question it exactly which dive I was on. But this was Keys, because I know I had just gotten through the day before that of going through the dive guy that had to do with flipper and stuff that runs out of there. And so that would have been it. It's not the one with Jack Tar Village and all that stuff in Jamaica. It's not when I was Bahamas. It's not when I was here. It's one of the key dives. In fact, I know exactly which one it is. Well, it wasn't when I was in Belize. It wasn't Cozumel, Cancun. No. Right there. And he thought I was lying, and he got all mad and everything. And he'd already bought a couple of fish and got them bagged up before we got into this point here where we were talking about. And so he's just going to take those fish and he was going to leave, and he acted like he wasn't going to shop here anymore or anything. And I go, that's sad, dude. Look into it or whatever or something, And so he went to the front counter with it, and around about that time, one of the lady running the place was coming in there, and she was like, what happened? What do you get all mad about? And I said, I told him that I saw a lionfish in the Keys whenever I was diving there a few years ago, and he started throwing a fit. I don't know. I don't think he was going to buy him, because one won't go with his fish. He'll eat about half the fish in his tank, so whatever, And she goes, oh, really? And she just turned around and walked back up to the counter, and she knew, because she dives in the Caribbean, and she had heard already that they had been let out accidentally in the Keys, and the lionfish were there, and that I was probably telling the truth. I never saw that man again. So the last part of that probably didn't even matter, but what the hell, he probably knows it now. And if you don't know it, they got let out in the Keys, and there's been a lot of things said from a guy that had a bunch in an aquarium that somehow were males and females, and boom, but that would all be so kin to each other, would gene pool screw itself. To the reality of what it was well, they say it was Hurricane Andrew. And whenever it came in, there's a fish shop that was there on the um, canals that run in that used to import fish and so on, along with selling Caribbean stuff, and they got destroyed, and all that stuff went in the water. Problem is that that was like 93 or something, and my visual was like, no, isn't that 91 or so? Then come to find out it was, no, back in 85, 86, whenever that hurricane went through and hit the same damn place that they said Hurricane Andrew did it to them again, had actually taken somebody out just a little bit down the way. And that person had lionfish. He also had Hawaiian fish like yellow tangs and flame angels and so on in there too, but none of those seem to have existed at all. They're not found in the Caribbean. Not even in the Keys right there. No, you can't find it. It didn't happen. But what did make it out of it were these lionfish. Now, they've bred in captivity. I mean, people that have had them, as far as ichthyologists checking them out and so on, and some big exhibit have had them lay their eggs and go through their spawning ritual and spinning up, and then she puts out a big mass that's around 30 to 50,000 eggs. Problem is in the Caribbean is the things that would eat those eggs and all the corals that would eat it up and so on, and some of these microfish that later it would probably be this big thing's chow time, don't exist in the Caribbean so much, and wow, they've gotten broken out bad. But then also, whenever they're young, they eat all the little fish that are going to become the chain of life that's been going on there for a long time, and lo and behold, whoops, they start consuming that and kind of ruining the eco-culture that's there. So people have taken, well, first of all, they're great eating. You don't want to sit and suck on the straws on the tips or anything like that, but they're great eating as far as goes. It's a cod type situation, so it tastes great. Apparently, from dealing with them, I used to not do so. This is a zebra lionfish. He's much smaller, even though the picture's close up and all that stuff. He's probably 5-6 inches, maybe 8 max, more like 5 or 6. His eyes seem a little glassy, but you can tell his fins are all docked real bad. There's a new form that they found that's just like the other ones, or as big as the other ones, but its fins are only about half the size or so, apparently, and so they want to give it a whole new name, whereas a lot of these other ones, due to variation, they don't want to give a new name to. Now, this is a guy sometimes called a clearfin lionfish, but this is the radiata lionfish. And if you look at that face, he's got that sphex antennaata type thing going on, doesn't he? But then it carries on all the way through the body. He also talked about as being a bar-tailed lionfish and so on. That actually is a different lionfish, like Russell's we were talking about, where it has a bar right at the very end of the tail versus not having a bar. But this one has two stripes that are straight lined going on, and there's this equal sign on its tail. But it has radiated lines off of it and its spikes that are on it, but that doesn't have very much plumage, if you will, looking at things from a turkey fish point of view. Birds and fish have a lot in common, and then again, they don't have much in common. It's amazing what's up under that ocean of blue that you never knew. Here's an aquarium in Monaco, and as you can tell, this one doesn't have separated finnage, but it's real solid in it, and it has different coloration. The striping isn't working out correctly with it. In fact, this one versus the one that's right beside it on the right facing away are not the same. And in fact, the one on the right, you can see the striping is a little messed up under the belly, and some of the times that's what's cool about it, is this marbling effect, but there's also no thin lines in between. on either one of these. So people have taken to calling this Mozambicus because it's so they would still say, it's Pterosis radiata Mozambicus species. Or you see SPP attached to that, and it basically means, commonly found as, or found in the area of, whenever you get them from, basically. Down there in the bottom right hand corner is a little dot dash grouper, like a cometa. Here's a look at Sphex and what it would look like, and so you can tell that really doesn't look the same as the others. It's a radical difference, but it's within the same family, variations on the theme. But these all get separate names on them, unlike like humans and some other animals where they tag them to be totally different. Here's a red volatile lionfish, and it's really red, like the first one we were looking at. Doesn't have any clear points on him, but if you notice right in here, he has a row of false eye spots that are in his fins that are right there. And there are ones that have false eye spots and ones that don't. And they start juveniles, and a lot of them with having false eye spots, but then they go away. But there are other ones that'll keep it into, like this one, an adult. This guy's probably a foot long. See those cool antennas that look a little bit more like a ram's horn hooking up there? Here's Pterosis miles, or Pterois miles. They say he's hunting, but what their swirl is in front of him is a massive glass fish. And again, he's probably about a foot long there too, but these glass fish are probably an inch long. 2 for the giant ones that are there. And he's just going in and crawling up and then and sucking them in. When you get a fish like this in the hobby, though, you're trying to get him to feed certain foods, and you try to get them to feed on what they're normally feeding on. And you can't buy glass fish, and if I can get you a type of cardinal or something, it's going to be so expensive to feed the guy, you're going to end up being the guy with the only $1,000 lionfish all of a sudden, whenever he's probably $89. Well, one this size, due to shipping and how much weight that cost, everything, about $120. Better if you just bought a medium, be more like $60, $70, $80, depending. Over there at the far left, you can see that there's a sponge, but that's more of a tree sponge as opposed to the peripheral we're looking at. Where are we at? 43. Wow. I just get to yapping about fish. Here we have again a radiata, so it's endemic to the Indian Ocean. People call it the Indian Ocean lionfish and so on. So here's what's strange. We have that antennae, and it's way up over here. And we have way around and way over here the Indian Ocean lionfish. So they seem to be connected to each other by that pattern and so on, but there's no connectives in between. I noticed in the fish hobby over years that like Bali seems to be a cutoff point. And everything left of there is Indian Ocean. And in fact, there's a few hundred miles, and then certain fish are different than each other, whether they have a certain trait about them that's a little bit different, or coloration, or so on. So it's quite unique and odd. Here's one that they caught for the hobby and popped him in there into a bag. And they carry them all up, put them in the boat, do it again on the way out, do it again into boxes that get shipped all the way, picked up at the airport and put into water that'll equate to the ocean, and then there you have it in the fish hobby. There's a close-up look of one. There's those eye spots in the fins, calling it volatins instead of miles here. Same picture again there. But again, they feed and they make this into food now. It's considered to be haute cuisine. Like, share, and subscribe, and enjoy. good with lemon and tartar sauce. Peace.